listen to stories like this. We left off last week. Is that where we left off? I don't remember. But we talked about a certain puzzle. And we're not going to solve the puzzle. We're just going to talk about it more. The puzzle is, or the aporia, the impasse is, starting from the thought, which is a kind of reasonable thought. It's the thought basis of a lot of Plato's arguments for what humans should do in the Republic. It's some version of Aristotle's arguments, both in the beginning of the Ethics for the human good, known as the function argument, and at the end of the Ethics, known as the argument for the contemplative life, and taken over by later people like the Rambam and others in a more clearly defined way, which is something like this. That, like we gave in our little teacher example last time, it makes a lot of sense to talk of when we talk of the good of each thing, of a thing, we generally mean the specific good of that thing, right? This is also how we understand the world, by finding what's the specific definition of a thing, right? Just like we ask what a couch is, we don't answer it is a thing made out of feathers. It's true that it's made out of feathers, or whatever it is they make couches out of. But it's not true that that's what a couch is. That doesn't make me much closer to understanding what a couch is, right? I need to talk about what it specifically is, right? Unlike some other things made out of feathers, which are very flat, a couch is something that's not so flat. It has some support and so on. In the same way, when we try to judge if something is good, if something is a good version of that thing, right? We need to think of the thing as it is specifically, not as it is more generally, or not as it is as part of something else, right? The one way to say this would be something to say like, well then, since God has a reason or a goal for creating everything, He didn't create some, if they would be the same thing, then He wouldn't have created it again. So there must be a specific good for each thing that He created, right? That's why we say things like, if humans would be the same as animals or the same as angels or something, there would be no point in them. But just another way of saying that then there wouldn't be such a thing. And obviously there is such a thing. Right? And therefore to find out what is good about it, what is good for it, right? We have to think of what is specifically human. Okay? This is where the argument starts. The argument for specificity. Right? In Plato's version, which is more complex, since he talks about all the parts of the human in this way, but then goes on to talk about different people the same way. It's a kind of division of labor. Maybe that's an analogy, but like the kind of way of thinking is division of labor. This is why we started to talk about this whole concept of specialization being relevant to this, right? Because it makes sense, and again, now this is not an argument, it's some kind of analogy, but it makes sense, it's more efficient for each thing to do what it's good at, for each thing to do its specific job. If we have a city or a group of people who have some kind of common goal, each of which has different talents and different jobs, the different parts of a big thing that we want. We want to accomplish a big thing, and we need to divide it into parts. And because of that, either by choosing people already predisposed to that, or however we do it, we decide to assign jobs to people. It would be very good for each person to do his specific or her specific job, and not do the two things out, not have any person do two things, mostly because that would be inefficient. It would be a waste of resources to have a fisherman on his days off be the paisik. That's like not a good way to run the world. So therefore, we should try to get everyone to do only one thing, which is their thing. Makes sense. Doesn't make so much sense, but it makes some kind of sense. Yeah. This is a basic idea. And this also leads us to find either when we talk about humans versus all kind of other things, we were going to look for this specifically human thing, because it would be a shame for humans to do things that bears can do too. And it seems like the best organization, the best scheme is to have humans do what humans do best and have animals do what animals do best, and not for one of them to try to take over as others, right? Plato's argument then goes on to parts or powers of the soul, where he says it would be best for each part to do his thing, right? Makes sense? Okay. This is the kind of place that we're starting from. The problem with this thing is, like many kind of philosophical searches for definition, that we end up not really knowing where to draw the line. Why do we end up not knowing where to draw the line? Because figuring out what a thing is a very difficult thing, because we tend to think of a thing as the whole thing, with all of its parts, right? The big argument, the big kind of philosophical move is always to find out what the thing is, not as it's made out of parts. Because the moment you tell me, well, what is a human being? So you answer me something like, a human being is something with all these different things. Well, then I'm going to ask you, okay, so therefore you just said that a human being is not a thing. There's a bunch of other things that for some reason you put them together, seems to be wrong. Like, it seems to be untrue. Because two different things are not the same thing. And they don't add up to one thing. We need to have some understanding of how they add up to one thing, which is one thing, right? And then go back and ask you, how does one thing have parts? No, one thing is one thing. It doesn't have parts. Basic problem of parts and wholes. But in the context of human being, we have the same issue. And therefore, whenever you're going to explain what something is and say, well, it's something it's a combination of a bunch of parts, you didn't really say anything. You missed out the thing. This is a basic argument. If you tell me what is a table, like, the people that, a definition or a what, listen, an answer to a question of what something is, which is also going to be the same kind of answer to the question of what is the good of something, what is a good something, has to be one thing. Otherwise, you end up saying it's not a thing. You end up saying it's just two other things sitting next to each other, which is something that some people can say, right? In other words, you can answer and say that there is no things. Like some Buddhist genius once said, there are no chariots, because can you find it for me? Yeah, it's here. Well, no. This is his wheel, this is his seat, and this is his roof, and where's the chariot when I get to it? Lo kayam. And this is where we see the emptiness of all things by this stupid argument. Okay?
Isn't it
this is Nagarjuna, I forgot his name's argument. What?
Isn't this the boat sailing to Troy or something? That you replace all the panels?
That's a different problem, but yeah. Anyways, not exactly. The problem is that things can't be things and other things. Remember the law of non-contradiction. A thing can't be the same in the same way. Two things, not itself and not itself. Just two things is a contradiction. Itself and not itself. So is it? I don't know what you're saying. If you're yourself, then you're not something else. And if you're something else, then you're not you. You're not it. It doesn't have to be a you, right? You is a kind of thing. And therefore, to say that one thing is two things is just to contradict yourself, which is just a way to say, you could say that there's no one thing. There's no such a thing as a human, and therefore there's no such a thing as a good human. Maybe we'll talk about it, but we don't really know what we're talking about. There are a bunch of things, and for some reason, by convention, right? Not by nature, by convention, all these things, when they're together, when they're next to each other, we call them human beings, but there's not really such a thing. That is one option. This option leads to nothing existing. Yeah. Literally nothing existing, or in the...
Or only what's absolutely prime existing, right?
There's nothing like that. Again...
Something that's not made out of anything
you
else.
If you get to that, then you didn't have nihilism, then you have only one thing existing. But in any case, it leads to some very weird results, and some very problematic results, and therefore it's not a very reasonable mahalach. Some people think it's true, but you could also try to give up on our assumption that a thing has to be a thing. Maybe a thing doesn't have to be a thing. Maybe a thing can really be two things. And what about the basic, what we said, law of non-contradiction and things like that? It doesn't mean that. It's not really so important. It's not really so true, and so on. That's another sort of solution, right? One solution is to say there are no things. It just seems to be that way.
Or disregarding the problem.
There were ancient thinkers that said literally that. Everything's just by convention, right? Or we could say that your place where you started off, which we have to explain better, but the place where you started off, which is that things need to make sense. And making sense means being one thing, not being two things. It's not really true. And maybe we could even pretend that things make sense without being one thing. That is another solution, which many people might also think is intuitive, although it's mostly because they didn't really understand what making sense means ever. And that can't really be. Thing.
I don't know what thing means.
Okay, ist nicht. Labachot v'loyete, I think.
We'll find it.
So, where are we? Okay, we have to move on from this, but, right? This is all just to show why trying to figure out what something is. A thing is the answer to what it is, okay? The answer to the question, what is it? To find out what something is, which can't be answered by saying a bunch of other things, that's not what that is a complicated thing. By itself, and abstract, we're speaking very abstractly now. By abstractly, it's a very hard thing to do. It's very easy to jump.
Is.
Yeah, the answer to the question, what is it?
Easier to say that purple.
A thing means I come into the room, I see you, or I see that, or I see something, and I ask, what is it? My question is not to give me its color, or its shape, or where it came from, or where it's going. What is it? And to answer that question is a very scary thing to do. Leads to all kinds of weird things, so it's actually very hard. And now, back to where we said, I just explained to you what is going on. I just explained why it's a very hard question to answer. But in any case, back to one procedure for answering the question, right? The procedure which Plato called collection and division, right? Very basic procedure for finding out what things are. We can either put things into bigger groups, and we started with what everything is, and then we could either take a bunch of things, right? When we could either take a bunch of things that seem similar to each other or the same, and say, okay, so all of these are one thing, and now we sort of figure out the thing that they belong to, known as the generalization or the klal, the general thing. Or we could do the opposite way, which is start from everything and then cut things up until we find what this specific thing is. Remember?
I'm curious what... I mean, it's different than, let's say, saying... When we say... Like, just to simplify for myself, meaning instead of saying that purple is red and blue, you say purple belongs to regal colors.
Yeah, that's the way of collecting things.
I mean, that's collective versus deconstructive.
Dividing things. I don't know what you mean by deconstructing.
Meaning,
things.
we're unsatisfied with saying that purple is red and blue because that doesn't tell me anything. That's just telling me what it's made out of, right? That's telling me the parts. I didn't ask what the parts of it are. I asked what the parts of it are made into, right? And what it's made into is a royal color.
You could say that. I don't know if it's a good answer, but you could say that.
Not if it's a good answer, but it's the kind of answer that would be sufficient.
Yeah, or a sharp color, or a big color, and things like that. Yeah, and then we can have to go back and say which one of the regal colors is it? Then you end up saying purple, or you have to find a way in which purple is different from whatever other color you're speaking of. Yeah, okay. Exactly. Now again, since especially when we speak of things that have a lot of parts. It ends up to become hard to find what is the thing that is the thing, that makes it what it is. Because, for example, and now I'm going back to my person that we're talking about. One solution or one thing that we do is we cut off a bunch of unnecessary parts, right? We abstract them away, right? We say, what is it to be a
chair?
Right? What is it to be a human being? Let's just stay with this thing, okay? Well, I can abstract away everything. It's not to have a color. And I know that because color is a too general thing. Everything in the world has colors. Everything visible, at least, has colors. And therefore, have color is not human being. Now, it's true that all human beings have colors. But I just stripped it away. This is why we call this literally stripping, right? Hafshata. Stripping parts away, right? When I meet you, well, my eyes see something with colors, whether your body, whether your clothing, I'm stripping them off. That's not what I'm not answering my question of what you are, right? And then we strip off even more things. And one way of ending up is to say something very funny in some way. We have to figure out, in other words, we have to figure out the correct procedure for stripping away things. Because
you can end up
otherwise, that's one problem, but let's talk about a problem before that. One funny thing that people end up doing is, and gets complained about a lot, is to say, okay, so there's a bunch of parts, let's count them, there's 75 parts in a human being. Really only one of them is human. Okay, now you could cut parts in many ways, but let's say we could literally imagine them as literally parts in space. When we say a human has hands and feet and all of those things are not human. They're shared by other things. They're not human. The only thing that is human is the brain or something like that. Therefore, now, whenever you meet a human being, you philosophically, theoretically meet only his brain and not anything else. Because that's the human part. Everything else is not human. Right? Now, this procedure is wrong also. Why is it wrong?
Because uniqueness does not necessarily constitute essence.
No, I'm looking for uniqueness.
Right, but it doesn't account for the fact that this doesn't exist without the parts, right?
The answer is because just finding one part...
It's not an independent part.
Right, exactly. It's not a human. That part is not a human part. If you find a brain in the street, you didn't find a human, right? Not even in an abstract sense, right? And if you'll find a human being, then now this example.
Communicative brain.
This example, well, we'll figure out. This example is even true for people in a certain sense of activities, right? If I find a human being who only thinks and doesn't do nothing else, I also didn't find a human being. So now,
part of our problem, right?
Right. So now, exactly, I'm just saying it and explaining it to you. So therefore, this procedure of finding out what something is, or by cutting off all the parts that seem unnecessary, and staying with one part is not a good solution. It's not the good kind of solution. Because that one part is never the same thing as the whole. It's just one part. You can say it's the most important part. It's the part that makes it into what it is, and so on. We could say, obviously, these things would be true. But we can't ignore all the other parts and cut off one part and say that that's the part, because that part in itself is not the thing we were looking at for. That's at least one problem with that procedure. I think that there's something more problematic, which is something you could say it in a more abstract way. We were looking for the one thing that is the whole human being, and cutting it up is the same problem. The basic problem that we have by saying that a human being is a bunch of things, it doesn't get solved by saying it's one of those things. Right? In other words, you're still, for example, the way of saying this would be something like this. Some people go around saying, you hear a drusha that says, a human is a body and a soul. The body is not important, only the soul. And the way this person is thinking about it is the soul is another thing. It's a thing in the same way the body is a thing. Some kind of, maybe even a physical thing. Or not a physical thing because it's very highly, but at the end of the day, a physical thing, it takes up space, it could be shining and clean and dirty and all kind of things like that. And it's just one more thing, and it's the most important thing. And for some reason, therefore, the other things don't count and not part of what you are. Right? That seems to be just wrong. For this reason, right? Because you looking for the wrong kind of answer, right? Since we just said, if you could do this kind of answer, you might as well just say human is both of them, but we can't do that because we're looking for one thing. So others you say bodies and souls. Okay, souls are human, souls human. So what are the human bodies doing there? Are they little human bodies? They're not human bodies. What are they? Random stuff that gets stuck somehow, right?
It's the bus.
What?
It's just the transportation.
Okay, but that's not. So this is not a kind of solution either, right? Or maybe it is. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to be. So,
is there a thing that harmonizes them all together? Can that thing be a thing?
Is there a fifth thing, a seventh thing, whichever number we have? Like one more? Isn't that just going to make one more thing for the problem?
Right, okay.
Right, you can't also have the same kind, if it's the same kind of thing, right? If I have three things that all together make up something. Okay, so there's something in the fourth thing. Firstly, that fourth thing doesn't exist, nobody ever saw it. Besides for that, that's just another thing. So then what connects that thing to the rest? We end up in an infinite regress.
So what?
Let's say someone tells me the fourth thing. A table is made out of a top and legs. Okay, now where's the table? Top, legs, three things. The table is three things. Top, legs, and table. Why? Because top and legs are not a table. So we need some third thing to make it into a table, which is the table, right? Now, what connects the table to the top and the legs? The fourth thing, right? How many times are we going to continue this process? What's going to stop it? It's a problem. We don't have a good way to stop it. We can't just add one more thing. Adding one more thing never solves problems. Not the same kind of thing, right? And so, what is the result? What is the solution?
A new classification of reality, or some kind of principle that accounts for what's beneath it without being reduced to what's beneath it, right?
Right. The solution must be, according to everyone that doesn't want to go on one of the two routes of either claiming that everything is one, there's only one thing, which would be Parmenides' solution, or claiming that everything is nothing, which is Heraclides' solution. Anyone that doesn't like one of those extremes, right? You could always say that everything is God anyways in Shem. Or you could always say that nothing exists in Shem. Those are two possible solutions that great men have taken. But since those solutions are not very practical or not very true, we need to find the third way. And the way out is necessarily not adding more parts, but finding a new kind of thing, right? That's the trick. That's the big philosophical trick. Instead of inventing new things, which is what the engineers do, we invent new kinds of things, right? In other words, the kinds of things that our question was talking about was some simple version of wholes and parts of different things that people do and so on. And in that world, and using those concepts, there's no solution to the problem. Therefore, we have to invent new concepts, which is the way of saying kinds of things. Right? What exists isn't exhausted by the three kinds of things you talked about, really by the two, right? Really already by one. Things that are next to other things or that somehow work with them, so wholes and parts. But there is a third kind of thing, at least one of them, and maybe even who knows how many more, right? And that's kind of thing is just the answer to this question, right? Which is what it is that makes something what it is specifically, or the kind of thing it is specifically, but is not just all the things that it's made out of, not the sum total of them either. Because that's just a way of counting them all up and giving me a total number, right? But some third thing. And of course you should ask me, when did I ever see it? And the answer is, I just saw it, I just showed it to you. Unless you want to run away and close your eyes and say, I didn't see any things, and my eyes were lying to me, and my basic thoughts were lying to me, and also. Otherwise, that's when you see it, whenever you see something. It's very simple. Right? So in some sense, we did accept the kind of solution that someone else would say, which is, my criteria for understanding was wrong, right? Because I said things can't contradict themselves. And therefore, something made out of two things is just nonsense. So someone would say, well, obviously nonsense exists, so your criteria for understanding is off. Right? But I did something very similar to that, but not the same thing. Why didn't we do the same thing? Because the one thing we didn't change was our criteria for intelligibility, for understanding. We didn't say, well, we thought that there's only two kinds of things, and that's what makes sense. And therefore, a third kind of thing either doesn't exist or disproves what we think understanding means. Does that make sense? No, we still think that understanding means exactly what we thought until now. Understanding is one thing, and for understanding, we 100% accept these kind of laws of non-contradiction, these extreme kind of laws of non-contradiction, right? Like, something can't be identical to itself and different at the same time, and therefore things can't have parts. But we are keeping our basic brain, keeping our idea of what understanding is. We will add to ourselves a kind of existing thing, right? We're not going to add to ourselves a kind of understanding. You could call it that way, but it's not supposed to work that way. We're going to add some kind of thing that exists in the world, which we're going to be able to understand. Well, in some sense, since understanding goes after the kind of things you understand, so you could call it adding a kind of understanding. But what we really did, and this is important for this whole way, is our understanding on the idea of understanding. And because we keep that fixed, we are going to invent a new kind of being. Not invent, notice, right? Notice a new kind of being. Yeah, discover. Discover sounds too much like we're digging somewhere. Just noticing, because it's all over. None of these things are discoveries. That is the basic philosophical, Aristotelian, Platonist way of dealing with the world.
No, what's that thing?
I'm just talking about how to think of the thing and the things and the things. Yeah, something like a form. That's just a word that we should stop saying that word because it doesn't help anyone. The thing that things really are.
And what a table is, that's not the legs and top.
We can give this a name, and say the form or the whole or whatever you want to call it. That those names are not going to help. The thing that is not, that's all. We don't have to say anything more. In some sense, it's very direct, right? The table or the person. Then to define it, not to give words to this, we end up back in the previous problems. I'm not saying that we solve those problems. I'm saying that the holding, the seeing of this thing is by getting into this problem. If you wouldn't get into the problem, this is why, you know what I'm saying? This is why when you ratify these philosophies, when you start saying the answers without the questions, people have no idea what you're talking about.
Just attach words.
It doesn't help, because I could go around saying form, and this is what happened for a long time. And that is the solution, but that's just saying a word. I mean, of course, if you learn the language, you sort of learn what it really means. It's not exactly like I'm saying. But when did anyone see a form? Nobody ever saw a form without seeing a form means seeing the problem that leads us to see that. That's how it's seen.
As unable to be reduced to just parts.
If I could show you, I mean, of course you have all these options are open. I didn't really close them off. I didn't disprove them right now. But if you could see that doesn't make sense, and it's sort of reasonable actually, intuitively it's reasonable it's reasonable to say that these extreme opinions don't make sense. That is the thing that we just saw. We saw it all the time. We never stopped, right? We never started seeing it. It's just explaining what we always saw. This is what's important. It's unlike where we talk about this a lot in other places, right? You could sometimes say when people people that realize certain very simple things have this tendency to start saying, this is beyond comprehension. And it's true, it's always beyond what comprehension, which is this match between what you think comprehension means and the things that you're comprehending. And something changed either on this side or on that side, and therefore it's beyond that comprehension. But it's not beyond comprehension in the sense of giving up on the idea of comprehension. At least not in this way.
Understood backwards.
I think that's just a lazy thing that think people say when they can't explain themselves. And it may be impossible to explain yourself, and this is why the only way to explain yourself is to make someone else be as perplexed as you, which the perplexity is what shows you the answer. There isn't any, and now what it is, it's not, do you understand what I'm saying? These are, in some sense, intellectual beings, right? Forms don't exist anywhere beside, we get into another question, do they exist outside the intellect? Do they exist in the world? Do they exist in a separate realm of forms? Do they exist in the things? These are all questions that only make sense after we at least know what we're talking about, right? And the only way to know what you're talking about is to have the problem, because that's where it is. It's not like, well, we had this universe that had 10 things, and then we added an 11th thing called the form, and now we're just going to teach that and everyone's going to understand. Well, yeah, the math might work out, but nobody will ever have seen a form that way. This is why, this is the real reason.
As not entirely, as not explained the way by
again, it's the thing that makes this problem a problem.
That's not the legs and top.
Yeah, but just which is a problem, right? The thing that makes the problem a problem.
And it's the solution.
Well, really to figure out the solution, we might, if we at least understand the thing we're talking about, then we can start asking a lot of questions about it. I'm not saying, anytime I say something, I'm just getting us to somewhere. There might be a lot of questions, like I said, there's all these internal debates of how to understand it, and all kinds of questions. It's not a solution. It's only a solution in the sense of a solution to the problem of not knowing what we're talking about at all.
And to say, but to say this, we meaning the form can't just be artificially.
Well, you could say that, right? but then we go back to our original perplexity.
To be able to speak about things that are of tables and not of legs and tops.
Again?
Right? Meaning this is that classification thing. I arrive at the form and I could speak of things that are of tables but not of legs and tops. Right?
Well, everyone does that. You don't need to know about forms to do that. Everyone does that.
Everyone does what? Speaks
this
about
abstraction.
tables without speaking about the legs and tops.
Yeah.
Right, and the point is understanding that you're talking about tables and not legs and tops.
Yeah. But exactly. But I have to show you that you're doing that.
Right.
And that is just the question. This is the reason why philosophers have said or taught that you need to ask the questions every time again. And it's not like people think because they have not because chazur. No, it's not because of some weird idea called critical thinking that you shouldn't accept things on authority or anything like that. That's not why. Although those are good ideas.
Actually know the definition
to some extent.
Of
it's because that's the way of seeing the things that we're dealing with. If you have a different way of seeing, like maybe you have other ways. Just tradition is not a way.
Certain things could become more recognizable through your vocabulary, or you could reset your perspective on the world, that these things become more apparent from the outset, right?
I'm not sure.
I think it's easier to conceptualize what a form is after thinking about the fact that,
again, they're asking the question. By asking the question. I don't know of another way that doesn't involve asking the question.
Yeah, you ask the question for enough times. Again, when you...
Okay, but again, I'm just saying that this is why every generation or every person who wants to be shown these kind of things needs to ask the question, because philosophy is really, or positive philosophy, right? A philosophy that has some ideas about the world, is a way of seeing things that are unseeable in any other way. There might be miraculous solutions to this problem, like you should be a prophet, and not a philosophical sense of a prophet, but like in a mystical sense, like have visions, which is another way. But also that requires you have to have your experience yourself, but it doesn't require having questions in the same way. That's the only solution that might be a solution. But the idea that we're having is that the place where you see it is by the questions.
Because that produces it again, right?
Because that is what we're seeing. There isn't something else. There isn't a question and then an answer. It's unlike, we have to get used to this because it's very unlike the way we ask and answer questions in physical sciences, right? In physical science, we answer questions by bringing in new facts. Right? Like I said, that's why I said don't say the word discovery, because discovery has that connotation nowadays. Right? If I say, I want to know, if I ask a physical science question, I ask, how are tables made? Right? There's going to be somewhere where I could see that question, answer independently of the question. Right?
I think it's where, and in some sense,
in other words, the factory of the tables or whatever.
Right, and it's when the kind of, as you get used to the reflexive answer being insufficient by reintroducing the problem again, right?
Yeah, but just to follow what I'm saying, we are used to answering questions in a way that we don't need the question after we have the answer. Because that's the kind of questions we're used to asking. And then if someone says, well, you should every time ask to see the factory, I don't know, maybe you should, I don't know, it sounds like a weird thing to do anyways. And actually almost nobody does it in the physical science except like to verify that we didn't make a mistake. But not in order to see the thing that we're talking about, right? Until you get to like very basic physics where there's actually things like this that we only know they exist because of certain questions. Oh, that's what they mean. But other than that, all the kind of things, like then you ask me how was the table made, and I show you a factory, and then I ask you what is a table, and then you ask me like, okay, so where can I go see that? You can't go see it anywhere. This is right. You saw it right here. This is why. This actually is itself why. Maybe I'm jumping here, but this is why we say that intellectual life is only free life, because it doesn't need anything besides for thinking. Very important. This is why Chaznish was against Kisvei Yad, right?
I missed that jump, yeah.
It's a big jump. This is why the Chaznish was against reading Kisvei Yad manuscripts. You understand what? No? Why doesn't that? You gotta learn how to do this. Hello.
The momentum was great, and then it totally fizzled on that last week. Not enough
so we could stay here.
Not a steady enough transition. It was sharp incline there.
So we could stay here. But what we're saying now is that understanding the kind, like someone could say something like this: philosophy is knowing forms. Plato and Aristotle would agree, right? But with different understandings of what the word form means. But they both, so in which senses are they both the same thing? Because they both answer the same question, right? They both answer the question of what is specific things? What are things? What is it? Right? And that is not, and assuming that we can't have the easy ways out of just reducing them to their parts or just telling us where they came from and all kind of things which really are answering different questions and don't answer our question. Now, and we just said, I'm making Chazur, we just said that this is a thing that can only be seen in the activity of asking the questions, which is called the activity of thought, right? Of philosophizing. In other words, of realizing that there's a problem here. Asking the questions doesn't mean saying the words of the question in benign shale, right? It means I'm getting stuck. Getting perplexed, being stuck. That's what asking questions mean. Not pleasant necessarily. It means getting stuck. Right? It means bumping into something which your idea of understanding doesn't match with. And if assuming that you don't want to give up on your idea of understanding, right, which is another solution, right? Right? There's sort of these three extreme solutions that are accounted, which many people just assume they work together, but they don't, right? One solution is nothing exists, one solution is everything is one, and the other solution is we don't exist. We don't understand anything, right? So there's nobody to ask the question. There's no way to ask the question, right?
Well, our cognition doesn't match the reality that exists.
Exactly. Existence isn't intelligible, right?
That could be a twofold. You could put that issue on the human being's cognitive ability or on reality. Well, that's maybe the nihilist position, right?
Right, but that's what I was saying. It's really a third thing. If you really say that, then you don't know either one of them. Many people say that and then connect it to one of these two positions, but it doesn't connect to any of them. Because if you don't know, then you don't know anything.
I mean, yeah, more complicated models, right? You have models where everything is perceivable, like phenomena.
Yeah, but wait. If we don't understand, if we without making things complicated, we're thinking of simple options, right? If we think that our idea of understanding things is a fake idea, then we don't know either that nothing exists or that everything is, only one thing exists. We don't know any of those things. We just don't know, right? We might know how to act. We can have, of course, this is a nonsense position because obviously we live by way of understanding things. This is why we have to end up with your complications. That's just saying, unlike many people that seem to think very easily that we could combine these two things, we can't combine these two things. Right? Someone that says everything is one or everything is nothing, actually says we can understand that. Because otherwise, how does he know that? Right? So, back to where I am.
I mean, everything is one doesn't assume that it can be known, right?
It does. Because how do you know that? Of course. Because you know that. If your criteria for knowledge doesn't count, then we don't know that either.
You know the one whole, but the one argument, why doesn't that reduce to additional levels? Meaning, the one argument is saying that everything, what looks like parts, and the problem of being unable to identify how this thing is not just reduced into further parts is solved by saying, because it's all part of one, right?
That there aren't parts. It's solved by saying, I have a problem. The world seems to be one way, and my logic, my knowledge, my mind noticed that doesn't make sense, and therefore, it must be a different way. Although it doesn't seem to be that way, we'll ignore the problems and we'll just make the conclusion that it's a different way. This whole procedure went through the mind, which didn't change at any stage, right? Of course, it's a problem because the one thing has to include the mind, and then you get to like.
Once you dissolve reality, once you dissolve what you're looking at, how do you move? You can move to nothing, and you can move to one, right? What's the substantial difference between those two?
I mean, they're two different shittas. Okay, that's what the difference. They're just two solutions to the same question. There are two solutions to a question.
I don't understand how they're two, is what I'm saying.
There are two different solutions. One is a positive solution, one's a negative solution. One says, that's a different discussion, but all I'm saying now is that both of those solutions, and this is not the point, both of those solutions assume that our mind works. If it doesn't work, then we could just go back to whatever and not think, and that's all. Whatever we didn't think, but we did before. Both of these are philosophies. Both of these are things that assume that your mind works and has led you to some very counter-conventional, counterintuitive solutions, right? The middle solution, which we said, is the one that says that your mind works, but not you should make it work better. But you were still understanding that. Now, where did I get into this?
To go to the sleep club.
No, I was just saying. Okay. So, since this, I forgot where you cut me off with some other question. I forgot what I was trying to say. Since the philosophy is seeing such kind of things, which are only seeable by doing philosophy, right? But also don't need anything besides. They're also not only able. You're not only able to get to them by thought. They also need only thought, right? Because what we did, again, to understand, right? What we did here, and this kind of solution, and this, which includes a lot of different solutions, just this kind of solution. What we're doing in it is to say, think about it better. That's all we said. We have a problem, many problems, but we have a problem, and we said the solution is not, one person could say the solution is to take a microscope and figure out what things really are. And that solution costs a lot of money. You gotta build a large hadron collider in Switzerland and charge the whole world for it. Maybe we'll find out what reality really is, right? Pretty expensive. Point is, it necessitates a lot, necessary for a lot of external things to happen. We need to go to a lot of places, bring a lot of facts in to solve the problem, right? A solution that says something like everything is one, well, yeah, might be a philosophical position. I'm just differentiating this from the scientific procedure, the natural scientific procedure. I think there's also, if someone says that what you need to do is that the solution is extremely...
instead of addition within the same area of cognition or circumstance, it's repositioning or
Who?
better positioning,
Who?
right? Meaning, as opposed to, let's say, a scientific way of trying to know truth, which is by adding...
The scientific way is to
Things like
go
this.
outside of thought, right? Is to say that we're missing some facts about
in
the
the
world.
same cognitive plane.
Within whatever, but their way of answering it doesn't actually answer, but the way of they think that they're answering is by going out and finding out more things. You need to go out and find out more things, right? And then we will not need, like I said, then we will, in that kind of way of knowing our thing, we will not need the question anymore, right? Our question was just a way it made us notice, therefore we have to go build our collider and find things out. Once we'll have it, we'll stop being perplexed ever. And for all the future generations of physicists, won't have to be perplexed about why apples fall down, because we know the answer already, and we could see it supposedly in some
Vacuum.
place or whatever. Yeah, right. And I actually think that many like mystical ways of thinking are also similar. Although they do tend to like go inward in the sense of not needing to buy many material, but they still think you have to do something besides for the question, right? And then afterwards, you don't really need the question anymore.
Meaning it tries to change the circumstances instead of...
You need to break your brain, basically, right? You need to break. That's what people mostly say. But anyways, that's different. Let's leave that on the side. I'm going to get into a different problem. I just think that way. But if you know these kind of things, Therefore, yeah, let's get back to this. Therefore,
Just understand, we're saying that it's trying to modify your...
Who is trying to modify? Please tell me who you're talking about.
The science way is trying to keep the perspective static and change the conditions.
I don't know why you're saying that exactly.
Thinking about, right? So instead of now thinking about a chair and a table, instead we're going to think about an atom. In the same way, we're going to think about an atom and electron. Instead of saying, no, you're thinking about chairs and tables the wrong way.
Yeah, it doesn't change thoughts. No, it doesn't change the ways of thinking. Or maybe it does, but anyways, that's what I claim it does. And the important conclusion from that is that you don't need the questions after you have the answers. So it's a divided activity, right? First we have a problem, then we go and we build our experiments, and then we have the solution. One doesn't really lead to the other, except by some kind of connecting accident or something. The philosophical procedure, which is the way in which the philosopher claims he sees what is, both has a question and answer that are connected almost necessarily, or maybe entirely necessarily. There isn't an answer ever to be found outside of the question. Right? Where do we find the answer? In the question. Nowhere else. Right? And also doesn't need anything outside of the question. It both needs itself and needs nothing else. There's never going to be something called experimentalist philosophy, which is like a good way of saying I have no idea what philosophy is. There never needs to go out of his mind to find something else. Assuming that this is really how the world works and this is correct, but anyways.
Well, we at one point, not to drag other classes into this, had mentioned that there is some sort of exposure idea where, like, let's see, I think we studied...
I don't know, I barely know what I'm saying now, so you're just going to confuse me now.
Okay. You have a stira from another class, that's all.
There's no stiras from other classes. It's because we didn't understand them well enough.
No, this is how much this
No, because I asked this
all the other
question.
classes are the same as this one.
You really only have to observe one thing.
That's a different question. I don't know. I'm talking about...
We spoke about observing a vast
I am talking about the
things.
kind of things that we're doing, not where they stop. And this is why philosophy is the only free activity, right? Make sense? Now you understand what I'm saying. Why not? What does free mean?
You mean like you don't have to pay for that thing in Switzerland?
Happy, free means both only gets to it by itself and doesn't need anything besides for itself. Those are good definitions for freedom.
Sun only has to rise once.
Or good definitions for... Yeah, but again, that's... I understand. Let's leave that. Those are also good definitions for what we were looking about, assuming that we got to the idea that what humans do best or most uniquely is to think. And actually, even more than that, What humans do best and most uniquely is to think by asking questions. Because angels don't have questions, so they're not philosophers. They might know everything, but they're not philosophers. Philosophy is the uniquely human activity. Like Socrates said, I am after human wisdom. Maybe there's divine wisdom that someone else has. I don't have that. I'm into the human wisdom. Right? This is the most unique thing that humans do. Because humans think. And it's the only kind of thought. You can even tell something as well, thought and the most. This is what people get confused about always when we talk about this. This gets us back to the question of thinking machines and things like that. We also, when we say that humans think, we mean a very specific kind of thought, right? This is very important to realize. Did I say it enough times yet? We don't mean the kind of thought which we call planning. Figuring out what to make to supper and how I'm going to conquer my enemies and make deals and stuff like that. Those are things that animals actually do, for one. And they're also not such interesting things, why they're not interesting things? Because they're not independent things, right? They're just better ways of making supper, or of having money, or of killing your friends or enemies or whatever it is you want to do. There's nothing very unique about them, and there's nothing very good about them. And if you need a lot of information, I need to have the whole internet in my head in order to figure out that what I want is do, which turns out to be the case for AI. Interesting, right? That's, I don't know if it's literally true, but in some sense, right? That is the furthest thing from an independent activity, right? You need so much things outside of you to make you into what you are. But we were looking for the things that are making you, distinctly from everything else, right? In other words, for the things that you don't need other things to be. Again, could there really be such a thing? And like you're asking, could we even think like that? These are other questions. But the ultimate definition is something like this, right? Which means that the only kind of thought that is free thought or human thought or independent thought is the kind in which you're doing nothing but trying to understand something. And what you're going to do is not trying to understand by digging, doing archaeology, by finding more facts about the world. Right? And therefore, it's not going to cost you money. But I say not cost money, I'm not saying it's cheap. I mean to say it doesn't need anything external to the thinker. Right? It's like God, who doesn't need anything else, but he just thinks about things, and that's what the existence of them is. Right? When God created the world, according to the biblical way of talking, he didn't order paint from the paint shop and rocks from the rock shop in order to put together the sky and paint it blue, right? It was his thought that caused the sky to be blue all at once. He only did one thing. In any case, that's a different Mishnah. This is why, right, this is another way of saying the same thing, which is why a kind of activity that needs nothing but itself to perfectly exist and can't need. If you put anything else in, it makes it worse. It doesn't make it better. And that's sufficient for itself in itself. The only kind of such thought is this kind of conceptual thought. Right? And of course it's about something. In other words, it's about reality. And therefore it means that what reality really is this kind of thing. If someone thinks that this is just us making pretzels in our brain, twisting our brains into pretzels, then that's not it. Then this can't work. Because then we're back to doing some kind of science of the human brain or even of the human cognition, which is an external science. Ideally, there could be experiments about that. And we're trying to do something that there can't be an experiment about. Because experiment is something different than asking a question. And experiment means I have a question. Now, step 2, let's go ask the world how it is. We don't want to ask the world what it is. We want to ask ourselves to find out what the world is. Right? Of course, assuming we have adequate facts, maybe this is only after you have some facts. That's a different problem. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to do. And this is why the Chazon Ish said that manuscript research is not learning. And therefore, since he had the very idealized version of halacha and Torah, which is trying to basically be philosophy, although it's not really true, that's what is his ideal. Therefore, he said that I don't care what it says in the book. The book is just a way for me to think. And what I need, ideally, I don't even need any books. That's what would be real Torah Sheba'al Peh. I don't need any books. The authority of the books is just that they lead me towards this contemplation of the true form. And it doesn't add to me anything to know that someone else said something or that there's some book and all kind of historical facts like that. And this is why, to be the Chazon Ish kind of lam, you don't need books. But to be a different kind, like Avad Yosef kind of lam, you need to be rich, because you need to be able to buy a lot of books. In other words, you're meshibet. Being rich is bad, right? When I say being rich, I mean to say you are a slave to your books. And that is not wisdom. Of course, I don't know if halacha is really philosophy. That's a different question. Or at least that's what he thought, and this is why. And now I understand what I said, and the Shimach, now you'll start believing me. So when I say things that sound crazy, I mean, it makes sense.
I didn't understand the context of Kisveyad even to now. You spoke about it a little bit more.
No, for like the last month, you've been saying, read books. Read it from cover to cover.
Of course you should.
Read. And then I'm like, I could think of my own thoughts, and you're like, how do you think of your own thoughts? I don't have my own thoughts. How do you have your own thoughts? Thoughts don't come from anywhere. Like, this is what we had this whole conversation, Shmone.
That's true.
Right? And
that's
now
true.
you're telling me that the Ksaviyat is not important to read. Maybe you'll find another interesting thought over there.
No, fem for the eigene kasha, no? Fem for the eigene kasha. You could answer that question. You could answer that question. You could answer that question.
Is it a question that we need new facts for?
No, it's not a question I need no facts for. You don't need to look up what it says in 3 other sheets. It might help you. And if you don't do that, you might be dumb. And it might help you also to read a lot of books that I've read or that I am thinking of when I talk. So you should at least understand how the thoughts work here. And I don't think it's
books that you read were the Ksaviyat?
No, but okay, that question you can answer yourself without even looking at any Ksaviyat. And the reason you should read all the books is because... Why should you read all the books?
I understand the words we're using. No, and also is that you don't have to do all the progress on your own. Mm-hmm. You can be taught things.
To be perplexed for real. The questions that you have are not good questions. Not good enough.
When the Ksaviyat, maybe you find something that's real.
That's not you understand that wasn't the discussion, right? Of the Kisveyad. That wasn't the discussion, right? Chaznish is moida that if someone will find the Gitter Shtickle Torah next Ksaviyad, he's going to read it also. But that's not his criticism, right?
I have no idea what the political background of this is.
There's no political background. The discussion, the point.
I have no idea.
Now you know.
Finding the Rambam's original Mishnah Torah for the sake of its originality. If it contains in it a better thought system because of a grammar mistake that was made in a later edition, then and only in that way is it more valuable. But it's not more valuable for the sake of preserving the authentic Rambam.
Oh, like the history sheet.
The authentic, right, exactly. We only care about the best Maimonides, not the authentic one.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Yeah,
in the context of the history of the
Anyways, does this answer our question of what kind of human to be? Not entirely. But the way it's supposed to answer the question is by saying that when we're looking for what a human is uniquely, we're not looking to cut off other parts. We're looking for the one thing that he is, which is a different kind of thing than the parts or the sum of the parts, right? And of all of them. It's not just a list of all of them together, right? Is they're working together. We could say something like they're working together towards a common goal. That would be a word. And now, therefore, we only need to...
It's not just that organization that's...
I didn't say it's only that, but that would be a thing that I could say.
What it is.
Exactly. Right? Maybe that's what it is. Depending on what you will hear when I say the word the organization. When you say the organization, not the organization of the organization.
Not the organization in space, next
the
to
order.
each other. The organization
right.
the
conceptual organization. Yes. The organization towards something. Exactly. That would be a way of saying it.
An organization into something.
Yes. And then, when we're looking for the uniqueness of it, we're really looking for the unique goal, right? For the unique kind of organization or the unique object towards it, which it's organizing itself. Right? We're not looking for a unique faculty. This is very important to realize. Right? And that might solve, or at least somewhat get us closer to understand how someone like the Rambam, who for sure thinks that there is only one good life, which is intellectual life. But that doesn't mean that he's saying that a human is only his brain. He says this explicitly. This is all explaining what he says. It means that is what a human is in its entirety. Makes sense? Does it help at all? Mm-hmm. Should help a little bit.
Yeah.
Could we go back to my problem with the factory that turns out to be nothing? It turns out not to be nothing. It turns out to be the thing, which is really the whole thing, all of it, and all its parts, to the extent that they're needed, including the janitor, maybe. If the janitor is really a janitor of that company. Maybe he's not. That's a question.
They cease to be parts insofar as we're looking at the
There are different kinds of parts. We could call them parts by analogy, yeah. Different kind of parts. They're like parts of an argument. Might be only one argument. They're not they're not separable. Okay, that's the story.
I mean, I don't have the same parts when I rearrange them and I put my feet on my shoulders and my hands on my legs. One produces a human being and one doesn't. There's certain arrangements that work and some that don't.
Yeah, that also. Okay, anyways, it's 10:30. What should I do? I should stop it? I'll stop it.